All right, welcome to another part in our Blender learning course. We have gone over quite a bit so far, but I wanted to take a minute to go back for a moment and spend some more time with modeling tools and texturing, just simply because this isn't the kind of thing that we're going to be able to cover all in a single modeling video or a single texturing video. Now that we have some foundations down, I want to go back, I want to reiterate some modeling points, as well as show you some new tools, and then just do a bit more of an advanced procedural texture setup. So before we get into that, I have a picture to show you. Now, this is actually, believe it or not, my first rendering, at least the first one I have access to. This was sometime around Christmas 2007. I was just getting into Blender, and we didn't even have cycles yet, the render engine. This was Blender's original render engine where we didn't have ray tracing, and as low resolution as this is, this probably took quite a while to render. That's the kind of machine I was working on, just my old family computer. I was like 15 or 14 at the time. So yeah, we are actually going to recreate this. Now, obviously, well, hopefully my skills have improved since then, so we're gonna see. But I found some ornaments. Hopefully you could see this. I'll include some reference imagery for these as well, so you can follow along if you'd like. I'll include an assignment for this one as well, where you can turn this in. Now, with all of my assignments, I am giving the opportunity to turn them in, and I will be grading them and doing paint overs. So I'll draw over them and make any notes for improvements that you could make. And yes, it takes me some time to do this, but I feel like one of the aspects that's missing on YouTube education is the follow-through from your instructors. So that's something that I want to provide. I want you to be able to get some feedback on what you produce with me. And more importantly than that, I want to open up channels of communication, so when you inevitably run into issues on projects, you know where to reach out to. Anyway, this is kind of my plan for this. If I can show you this, you could see that there is a narrowing or a pinching towards the bottom here as all of these ridges meet together at the bottom. And there is a bit of pinching towards the top as well, although the top is hidden by this section here, which takes the hook, which then hangs on the tree. So with that pinching, in my last video I showed you, or my last modeling video, I showed you how to make a sphere out of a cube. And the goal, that was for the kettlebell weight. And the goal of that was to avoid this kind of pinching we see at the bottom. But since this is actually an attribute of this real life ornament, it does pinch towards the bottom. That's something we can utilize the UV spheres for. So my plan is to use a UV sphere. I'm going to show you some modeling tricks. I think we'll get a chance to look at some selection hacks to be able to work quickly and select what we want to select without too much of a tedious approach. And then this second ornament, obviously much simpler on the modeling. If I can get that to focus, it's just literally a sphere. However, I think the texturing is very unique, so that's why I've chosen this one. So let's go ahead and open Blender. Let me move this out of the way and we can get started. So let's just start by deleting everything and adding a UV sphere. Now I actually think the amount of geometry or the amount of edge loops on this sphere by default is pretty good. So we're going to try to roll with this without making any changes. Now, similar to the kettlebell, I also think we're going to have to utilize a sub D approach. But time will tell, so let's go ahead and get started. So as we tab into edit mode here and go to edge selection mode, what I want to do is I want to select every other edge loop here. Now, I could just do what I've been doing here and go all around, but there's a faster way, especially if you have a number pad on your keyboard, which I don't, unfortunately. So I'll have to show you an alternative way. But what you could do is just select the first 2 loops in this pattern. We skipped that middle one. And then if you have a number pad, you could just press Control Shift plus on your number pad. Or in our case, we'll go to Select More and Next Active. And as you can see, that continued our selection pattern. Then we just hit Shift R and hold it down, and that will continue or repeat our last operation. Now we have every other edge selected. We just go to Select Edge Loop, or Select Loops, and then Edge Loops. And now that was a quick way to select every other one of those. So what I want to do here, I think, is, let me look at this. There is kind of a pinching towards each ridge on this ornament, but it's smoother towards the valleys. So maybe we can just handle the valleys to start with. So what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to scale these along their normal, which if you remember is just Alt-S. So if we hit Alt-S, we can scale those in. Now I'm not worried about the top and the bottom caving in on this ornament. We can fix that as we go. So I'm just gonna, actually let's fix that right now. Let's go to point selection, select the top and the bottom, and let's just delete those vertices. We can always deal with that later. Okay, now if we apply a subsurface modifier or subdivision surface, Control 2 and shade smooth, that's a pretty good shape for the valleys, but I want to pinch the ridges just a little bit. So let's do the same thing. I always like to turn off my subdivision in edit mode just so it's not in the way. Let's select this ridge and then the next one, go up to select, and this time, we should have done this the first time, let's go ahead and right click on next active and let's add to quick favorites. And let's do the same for edge loops. Just right click and add to quick favorites. Now, instead of going up to that menu, we could just select one and then the next one, hit Q and go to next active. And now we can hold down Shift R and repeat that action, hit Q and go to edge loops. That's just a quick way to find anything in a menu, add it to your quick favorites menu, and then when you're doing repetitive stuff like this, you just have easy access to it. So now with these ridges selected, let's hit Control B for bevel and scroll wheel up once just so we can get a nice pinching right there. And I think that looks pretty good. I don't know that I would change anything there. Just looking at my reference here on my desk. That's great. Now, as you can see, it's not just a straight ridge, but we have this twisting effect, and that's where we can use our proportional editing tool. So hopefully you could see the cool thing about this is we're implementing a lot of different tools that you've learned. Sometimes when you learn a tool in isolation, you think to yourself, when am I going to use that? Well, once you have it in your mind, you have it, at your disposal. You know it, you know where it is, then you run into situations like this where you can use it. So what we'll do is just go to front view and let's grab this edge loop with Alt left click. And if we didn't have proportional editing, you could see that's not very helpful for us. But let's just turn on proportional editing, hit R for rotate and Z to restrict it to the Z axis. And if we scroll wheel up, we can increase the effect of the sphere, the fall off sphere here. So I'm just looking at my ornament, trying to get a good reference. And I think something like that looks pretty good. Yeah, okay. So now let's go ahead and resolve the bottom of this. So all I'm gonna do here is just extrude with E. Let's turn off proportional editing and scale in. Ooh, actually, I changed my mind. Order of operations here. Let's do this before. Let's extrude, scale this in, and let's actually just hit M. Now M is a new tool, it's the merge tool, and we can merge at the center. So everything just folds into one little vertex at the bottom there. which usually would cause some strange pinching, but it's kind of on purpose in this case, just looking at the model itself. Now for the top here, we have it kind of raise up and meet with this crown that goes on the top. So we can just kind of hide the top inside of that crown. So let's extrude on Z, and then let's scale. So S, Z, 0. We scaled to 0 on Z. Then let's extrude this again and scale it inwards. Extrude one more time, right click, merge at center. M for merge at center. I think that's a pretty good top there. We're gonna cover that with the crown. Okay, now let's go to front view, select this edge loop, turn on proportional editing, and rotate. Now we don't have to worry about trying to make that match perfectly at the bottom. We've just rotated after the fact. Great. Let's save this. Let's call this class. I think we're on class number 4. No, we're on class number 5, I think. Class 5. Okay, save. We're good. And now let's move on with the actual crown. So making a plan here, it's basically just a circle or a cylinder, and then it has these sections that come down, kind of like an upside down crown. I'll send some reference imagery. Just look in the description so you can have a better look at what this is going to look like. All right, so let's add a circle, Shift A, mesh, circle, and by default it'll give you 32 vertices. I think we can get away with less. Let's maybe do something like 18. Keep it in even numbers so we can select a pattern at the top. I'm going to go to my top view, roughly scale this. Let's go to edit mode, select everything, E for extrude, Z for the Z-axis, and we don't want to come down all the way. We just want to come down, gosh, if my camera would focus, we just want to come down until things break off. Ooh, you can't see that very well. Just look at the reference imagery that I'm going to send you. So what I'm going to do here is maybe try a pattern. Let's select 2 and then have a space of 1 in between. Just eyeballing this, that looks like roughly the right size for what we need, and that worked out well for us. Let's extrude this down. So this is what I was talking about. Now we can scale this up, but let's turn off proportional editing. Scale this up. Let's move all of this down. Scale that up even more. Maybe bring it up on the Z-axis. Cool. And now what we could do is just extrude this, scale in, and actually because this is meant to be pretty visible, let's do Control F and let's do grid fill. That's opposed to doing something like M and merge at the center, just because this is something that you might see close up. So Control F, grid fill. If you go to the top view, you can rotate this around and you can change the span, so the amount of geometry that you have here. The only reason I'm thinking about this is there is a little raised bridge section, maybe, at the very top here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little hole where a hook goes in. So I'm thinking we can take these two right here, extrude these up, and let's turn on some snapping here so I can get these the same. I'm going to add my loop cut and snap to this edge that I just created. Let's delete these two faces, so X and face. Then let's select this edge loop, Shift Alt click that edge loop to select both of them, and then let's hit Control E and bridge edge loops. That's a tool I've shown you before. Let's bring these up just a little bit as well. Now, one thing you'll notice is if I right click and shade smooth, this doesn't look very pretty. Now the reason for that is because the edges need to be braced. So as a quick way to check what needs to be braced, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit Control 1 to do a sub D modifier. And I think we're going to actually implement that sub D modifier anyway. Let's go to a level of 2. We just have to brace some of these areas so they're a little bit more squared off. So let's just go through the pain of doing that to each of these. And I think it's fine if we get a little bit of a crease right here, because that metal is folded if I look at my reference, and there is a little bit of a crease in real life anyway. So I'm just going to brace each of these, and then let's select this and do a Control B for bevel and just brace that a little bit as well. And I think it's okay if these are kind of soft, but I don't want them to be that soft of a transition. Same with up here. Let's do like maybe right there. And then for this one, we could just bevel. So I added a loop cut in the middle, and then I beveled it with Control B. That's pretty clean. I'm not going to worry about anything else. Pretty small detail anyway in the grand scheme of things. Another thing I'm going to add though is a solidify modifier, and I'm going to put that in. Let's apply the scale and the rotation. I'm going to put that in before the subdivision. So it does have a softening effect on the solidify, but that's fine. And let's solidify inward. And then we could just scale on everything except for Z. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each of these edge loops here. Just because my crease is too much, I'm going to double tap G just to slide them down a little bit. Cool, I think that's pretty true to what we have. I mean, this is maybe a little bit skinny. So let's turn off our subdivision so I can see what in the world's going on. Then we should be able to just well, let's grab a few other things here, and we should just be able to scale on X. So on your end, you might not be doing exactly what I'm doing. Just have a look at your model, and according to your eye, just move things around as needed. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I feel like this is looking pretty good. Let's save that. Let's move this off to the side, and then let's add our second one, which is just going to be a UV sphere, shade smooth, subdivided. That one's already ready to go. However, let's go to the top view and wireframe, which is Shift Z, or you can click this little, up here, the wireframe mode. So this is solid, this is wireframe. The reason I did that is just so I could see where the center of this is, just to roughly place it where I need it to be. And now we can use that as a guide. Go into edit mode here. I'm going to delete this middle vertice. Loop select these, extrude up, scale this in a little bit, and then turn that subdivision off in edit mode. Select this loop. Control B to bevel. There we go. Second one is already done. So let's save and let's do some quick UVs. So I went to rendered mode. Quick tip here to turn on some quick HDR lighting without setting up an actual HDRI. Go to this viewport shading dropdown and deselect scene world. That will not use your scene world lighting. Instead, it's just going to use preset HDRI that Blender comes with. So you could pick one of these that you think looks nice. I'm just gonna go with the default one that they gave us. And that's just a quick way to get lighting into your scene without setting up lighting. Let's vertical split this. We'll go to the shader editor. Let's add a new material, and this is just gonna be our UV. We've done this before. Let's add an image. Generate a new one and make it the UV grid. 1K is fine. Let's plug this into the base color. That actually looks pretty good already. Let's select all the other objects and select this one last so that it's our active object. Now we can open up a new menu called the linking menu. So if you hit Control L, L for link, you get this menu, link or transfer data. And what I want to do is link materials. So that's just a quick way to take these objects and then the last object that you selected and to transfer the materials from the active object to everything that's selected. So remember our little talk we had about active objects being this brighter orange. Even if you have a lot of objects selected, there's always one that's considered your active object. And I'm not going to fuss over these UVs too much, just because our textures aren't going to be super reliant on UVs. Other than this ornament, we might need that a little bit. So all I'm going to worry about is maybe just the UVs at the top here for these two objects. Let's apply scale and rotation. Let's go into edit mode, select everything, and I'm just going to do some automatic UVs rather than go through manual UV settings. So let's just go to unwrap and go to smart UV project. And that's just going to do its best job at kind of unwrapping based on the angles of your geometry. And as you can see, that did a pretty good job. So now what we could do is actually start to assign some proper materials. So let's just get rid of that material on these. Let's add a new material and we'll just call it chrome or something. Select this one and link those materials. This one will be a material just called green. And this one will be our sparkle. Kind of that glittery material that we have. So now let's do some very simple materials. The only one I'm really going to spend time on for the procedural setup is this sparkly one, just because that's the most interesting. We can keep it pretty simple for the green material and the metal on top. So let's just make this metallic and bring down the roughness, and that's all we're going to do to those ones for now. And then for the green one, this is actually behaving as a metallic material, believe it or not. And you'll see the difference when I set this up. So let's choose like a green, and we could drop down the glossiness, and you could see that this just doesn't look right. Once we bring up the metallic, then it looks right. Now, you might ask, how is that the case? Because this, well, you can't feel this, but this, I'm telling you, it's obviously not metal. It's very much a plastic. They just have some kind of a coating on there that gives it that metallic look. So for it to look right, we do need to set that to like a metallic material. Now, for this other one, let's get into some fun proceduralism for these textures. And this is going to be kind of a challenge to figure out, but I have an idea going into this. So last time, very basic procedural setup, all that I really showed you was this noise texture, which if we take a look at it, even if I were to clamp down on this with something like a map range node, I really just don't feel like this is going to give us the look that we're going for. I want something that's less cloudy and has more angular shapes. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to something called the Voronoi texture, which is really, really useful and has a lot of different options. If we start to solo this, you can see the distance here has kind of a cool like cell. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like it has these little cells. This looks like a leaf. I always think about like a leaf, how the little cells on the plant there. But what I'm looking for is the second option, which is this kind of stained glass setup, which is really, really cool. So let's increase the scale, I don't know, to something like 200, maybe as a starting point. And by the way, these ornaments are like 2 meters big. Just keep that in mind. These aren't to scale currently. Let's set it like 200. I'm not going to mess with these other settings until we get there. Now we do have some different options here for the feature output. Let's just hold down Control and scroll through these. So F1, let me zoom in. F2, smooth F1, distance to edge, which we're not, looks like that's just the distance field. Ooh, that's pretty cool, but not what I'm going after. N sphere radius, and that's all of them. So let's go ahead and just use F1, the default, and let's keep it at Euclidean. There's Manhattan, Chebyshev, I don't know how to pronounce that, but let's keep it at this one. And let's go from here as a starting point. Now, rather than going into the base color here, what I want to do is I want to drive the normal. So if I plugged this straight into the normal, that has an effect, but you'll notice we're going from our color here to the normal. I'm actually going to drop down a normal map. This is what we did when we converted our colored image to normal maps. And that has a very aggressive effect here. If we turn down the strength, you can start to see, I think especially if I set it to something like smooth F1, you can start to see as I scale this down, that is actually creating like this bumpiness on the surface. However, I want it to be really, really aggressive because you can't feel this, but this is a really rough surface. A little ASMR for you. I'm going to set this back to F1, and let's keep this pretty strong at like 0.8. Then let's start to work with some of these other textures as well. I really want to drive the whole thing with this Voronoi texture, if we can get away with it. Let's also use this color to drive the roughness. However, with that one, let's drop down a map range so we get a little bit more control. If we solo that, we can see what I want to do here is clamp down. So I'm going to clamp down the whites maybe to like 0.6-ish. And then I'm going to clamp up the darks until those blacks are really prominent. So what this translates to is areas of super glossiness, very reflective, as you can see in the real one, and then areas where it's less reflective. But I don't want it to be that bright. So what I'm going to do is take the 2 max and reduce that to something like 0.5. So it'll never go brighter than half, kind of that halfway in between black and white. Now let's go to our principled. Let's view everything. Not really an effect yet, but if we turn up the metallic, you could start to see that's really sparkling. We might even, well, I don't know. I don't know that we need to increase the scale. We could. I think we're pretty close already. Let's try like 250 maybe. And as you turn off the normal map, you can see just the roughness, what effect that has on it. Let's have the 2 max be even glossier, like maybe 0.4. And then we can slowly turn that normal map up again. Again, I want that normal map to be pretty aggressive. So maybe like 0.6. I challenge you not to just copy the numbers that I have, but play around with the values until you find something that works for you. Now, my ornament here is like a golden yellow. But if you remember my reference that I brought up earlier, here it is. You just open that in a new tab. This was one of my first renderings I've ever made back in like 2007, and I had green and red ornaments. So I want to try to copy that look as much as I can. So instead of this gold, for me personally, I'm going to do red. You could do whatever your heart desires, but I am trying to recreate my first rendering. So there we have it. Now this is just this default HDRI. Let's try to organize this and create a scene here. So this original image, I rendered it at a very strange aspect ratio. I just added a camera. Let's go ahead and clear the rotation for this camera. So to clear rotation, you just hit Alt-R, and that's so that I can have straight looking down rotation as a starting point. Then I'm going to rotate on X 90 degrees, just because I want this to be looking straight on at our ornaments here. Yeah, as I was saying, I had a really low strange resolution for this last time, or in 2007. So under output, let's set our resolution. My original resolution was 604 by 453. So really, really low res. I'm going to go to my view camera. And what we could do is we can increase that a bit. So let's click on this, and you could do math in any field in Blender, which is really nice. So let's do 604 times 4. This will be very high resolution, but it'll be the same aspect ratio. So let's multiply both of those by 4. Now it's this strange resolution of 2416 by 1812, but I want to stay true to my original image as much as I can. So now let's set up the scene here. I'm going to move my camera back on its Z-axis, its local Z-axis, and then I'm just looking at my image here, and I'm going to start positioning these. Now, we haven't talked about parenting yet, but what I want to do is I want to grab this bottom part, and I want the crown here, the top, to follow wherever I go. So what I could do is select the top and then shift select the bottom and hit Control P for parent, and I can parent that to an object. And now whatever I do with this bottom part, rotate, scale, move, the top will be parented to it. The top is a child of that, so it follows wherever it goes. Let's do the same thing here. Control P, parent to object. Now what we could do is start to place these according to the reference image that I had, my really old rendering. So I'm just going to start rotating these around, and I'm going to be off center, but I can center my camera in a second. To duplicate this, you just hit Shift D. We've covered that before, but not in great detail, so if you don't remember, that's fine. And I'm just kind of eyeballing the placement of each of these. Now you can hit R to rotate once. If you double tap R, remember you get that free rotation, which is a little bit better for some scenarios. Shift D to duplicate. And in mine, it looks like I have some of these out like in front. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have them overlapping necessarily. And let's do this last one, and then we are going to have to tighten some things up and shift some things around. But this is a good starting point. All right, that's pretty happy with that. We're going to have to change our lighting and our environment. So we're going to get into a little bit of lighting and rendering here. I'm going to move my camera. Let's go into fly mode just so I can do this a bit. Oh no, I'm just gonna move it on each axis. Now, if you're not sure where the center is, you can go down to your camera data settings, and under viewport display, you can turn on some guides. If you come down to composition guides, we could have the center, we could have rule of thirds, we have diagonal. Those are gonna be hard to see on YouTube, but on my screen I could see a little crosshair where the center is, and that's going to help me with my positioning. I'm going to take an artistic license and change some of these a little bit from what I had in my original, just kind of because I want to showcase these models at good angles. And that's looking pretty good for me. Let's set up our lighting now. So if we go to this viewport shading drop down again, let's turn back on our scene world because we want to add our own HDRI. So if you remember how to do that, just go to world in the shader editor, hit Control T. That'll set up our environment texture and our mapping. And I'm going to try to get away with an HDRI. Let's just see how far we can get with one. Now, all of my HDRIs are from Polyhaven. You can go browse some different HDRIs. I just have a collection, and I'm looking for one with like a lot of smaller light sources. This one's all right. Rathus 1K, Rathaus, however you say that, open image. And yeah, you can see how I have little lights here. Now I could rotate this around to see if there's a better angle. I think this one might actually work. Rather than add a lot of tiny little lights to the scene, let's see if we can get away with this. Now we have a problem here because I want to mimic my original rendering as much as I can. I want this flat black background. I don't want this ugly pixelated HDRI as the backdrop. So what we could do, now we have a problem. If we just disconnect this and make this black, obviously the lighting goes away. So what if we could use the lighting from the HDRI, but we could have the backdrop be something else? Well, there's a really easy way to do that. We're just going to drop down a mix color node, mix between the HDRI and a black background. But right now, that's not doing anything for us. It's just mixing kind of halfway in between those. We have a really nifty node. We'll get into a lot more in future videos, but for right now, just drop down the light path node. And this basically breaks up the different light paths that we have with our Cycles render engine. And one of those, the first one, is called isCameraRay. We can use that to drive the factor of this mixed color node. And what just happened was it basically told our render engine that for everything that is contributing to the lighting of the scene and everything except for what the camera sees, just use this input for slot A, which is our HDRI. So this is the lighting for the scene. But anything that the camera sees, and only anything the camera sees, use slot B. So now we can have a different colored backdrop of whatever we want. I'm going to stay true to my original and just make it straight black. And I think that's looking pretty good. However, I'm going to increase the strength of my HDRI just because I want to get some more light in there. And this is something we're going to go hit hard with our follow-up render video. But for now, just go to your render settings, and under color management, I want a little bit more contrast. So under this little area, under view transform where it says look, just set that to medium or high contrast. We're going to get into color transforms or view transforms a lot more and really go in depth. But for now, just know you can kind of add some more contrast with that option. And that's looking pretty good. I don't like how this ornament and this one are so similar to each other, so I'm just going to rotate this one and just have a look around, maybe rotate this one so it's not, oh, now it's too similar to that one. Now all three of them are very similar. I don't have any that are like pointing towards the camera more. Yeah, maybe something like that. Now we can go to our render settings. Just talking about a few things here. Blender by default has a denoiser. I'm going to turn that off because I'm just going to have a little bit more samples. Samples, denoiser, all of this stuff. This is something we're going to get into more detail on a future video. But for now, I'm just going to set my samples to something really high. Usually I don't go this high, especially for animation, but since this is just a single frame, I'm going to turn my denoiser off and go to like 1024, and I'm going to decrease the noise threshold. Again, I'll get into these specific numbers a lot more later, but I just want to do a really high quality single image, so I'm not too worried about render times if I'm about to increase my render times here. So let's save. Go to solid view and give that a render. Then we'll be able to compare between my rendering of 2007, one of my first renderings ever in 3D, and this current one. So as this renders, let's just do a little recap here, talk about some things I would improve if I was doing this and going back and improving, iterating on this image. Since this is a tutorial, we're going to call this good. However, if I had more time, I think I would try to introduce some roughness variation, particularly in this green ornament. I just feel like everything is too smooth and too uniform. So I would try to introduce some of that as well on these little chrome tops here. I've got to say I'm pretty happy with the glitter. This is kind of a tough material to pull off if you don't know what you're doing. But we pulled it off pretty easily. And I have to say we also did it with very few nodes. We did it with 3 nodes, and one of those was the normal map. and one of those was the map range. So really it's like one node that's really driving this look. I think if you were to look up tutorials for this, I would challenge you to find a setup that's as simple as the one I just showed you. Usually the tutorials I've seen on like glitter tend to overcomplicate things in my opinion. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and compare. So this is 2024 Christmas, and wait for it, this is 2007, one of my first renderings. Did I improve? Let me know your thoughts. Check the link in the description. This will be an assignment that you can turn in. Again, if you choose to follow along and do this project and turn in an assignment, I can give you notes on it. What I'm really looking for, just so you know, you can do your own ornaments. You don't have to do mine. You don't have to match the same rendering that I did here and all the same colors. You can feel free to get creative, or you could just follow along. What I'm looking for is on this ornament, one of them I want some kind of geometry detail. If you want to follow along with mine, that's great. That's easy for me to grade, and I can compare you against what I've done here. And then one of them, I'd like to have this glittery material. So go ahead and follow my procedural setup. It doesn't have to be red, doesn't have to be green, but those are the two big things I'm looking for, is at least one kind of complex, well, it's not too complex, but one where there's some modeled detail and another one where you're utilizing the glittered texture. And yeah, we'll call it a day there. Thanks for watching another part in this training series where we're going over everything Blender. We have yet to get into really advanced texturing, and we've yet to get into some animation, some lighting, some rendering. Those are all things to come. I've said it a million times, but please go check out patreon.com/RileyB3D. That's how I make sustainable income. Hopefully someday I can get to that point for this channel. I don't necessarily make a ton of money on views. There is an indicator or a metric for YouTube called RPM, which is your revenue per 1,000 views. This particular category of Blender and Unreal Engine education, I haven't seen very high RPM numbers on my own channel, and I think that's the case for a lot of channels in this particular niche. The reason for that, I suspect, is there's less advertising or advertisers paying for ads on top of Blender related videos. You can figure out why that is. I don't know why necessarily that is, but all this to say, the RPM for a channel like this is not very high, and so I'm not going to be making money on views necessarily. What I'm doing is hopefully adding value for you and really teaching you good principles and things that you can learn that motivate you to maybe go check out my Patreon, check out some additional courses and some of the 3D assets and tools that I offer for you that hopefully justify a few dollars a month for you to go over there and support this channel. Your support means everything. If you are not interested, I totally get it. It's fine. Last thing a lot of us need is another subscription, even if it's just a few dollars a month. So at the very least, please like the video or subscribe, leave a comment. All those things definitely help me out. So thanks for checking this one out, and I'll see you as we continue on this in-depth look at Blender training series. Yeah, thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.